one race, competing visions for the future of New York City. A Democratic socialist, a guardian angel, a three-time governor, and the incumbent. Welcome to Battleground, New York City, the fight for your vote. I'm S.E Cupp. You were at candidate events today. Tell me what you heard and what you saw.
Mayors have three jobs. You got to keep crime low, quality of life high, and the tax base grow.
And there are going to be strange twists and turns before the votes are counted and the dust settles.
I think that much we can count on. Let's get right to it. Welcome to Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote, where we're covering the all-important New York City mayoral election for the next 13 weeks. Why? Because it's the thing that everyone's talking about. What's it mean for Democrats? What's it going to mean in the midterms? What will it mean for Trump and Republicans? We've got it all covered here. All eyes are on New York City. I'm S.E Cupp. Let's get right to it. Later in today's show, we'll talk about the candidate who's got the president's attention, but maybe not the president you think. But first, let's get to the latest news from the campaign trail. Joining me now is Nia Prater, a reporter with New York Magazine's Intelligencer. Welcome, Nia.
Good to be with you.
So the story today is actually about the incumbent, Eric Adams. He told Politico he is not dropping out of this race, even though he's polling fourth behind Mamdani, Andrew Cuomo, and Curtis Sliwa. The longer he and Cuomo stay in, the better chances Mamdani has to win. How sustainable is this intransigence? And will voters start demanding maybe that Eric Adams drop out?
I think the past 4 years of Adams's tenure in City Hall has shown that he's not exactly someone that's susceptible to pressure in that way. I don't think that voters have any expectation that Adams or even Cuomo or Sliwa have any plans of dropping out at this point. I think all three candidates sort of feel like they have their own valid claim to run as they see fit. And I don't think even the concept of splitting the vote three ways, I think, isn't really occurring to them at this point.
Will voters, I think you're absolutely right, because I know these people, and you've been covering these people, right? But do you think voters will get frustrated that at least a couple of these people seem to be in it for maybe some selfish reasons?
It's hard to say. I mean, I know there's been this pressure from donors at the very least of people who are, very clearly anti-Mamdani and are sort of trying to feel out who's the best candidate to defeat him come November. So you're definitely feeling that pressure from that set. And I mean, of course, donors vote as well, too. So, so in the mix. But will it get to the point of, Adams drop out? I'm not necessarily sure about that, but I think people are just sort of accepting of the kind of personalities that
the dynamics.
The kind of personalities that we often see in the city's politics.
Former New York Governor David Patterson endorsed Adams this week. Is that important?
I think it's certainly interesting from the end of, Adams isn't doing the best in the polls. I think it's clear that we can admit that. So it's kind of interesting to see him still pulling in these bigger names to support his campaign. But like big picture, I don't necessarily see it as having a huge impact on how voters are looking at this race. I mean, for example, early on, David Patterson was actually working as a strategist for Jim Walden's campaign. Right. And then a few months ago during the primary, he was backing Andrew Cuomo for the mayor. And forward a few weeks now, and now he's backing Adams. So I mean, on some level, it's sort of representative of how, this kind of weird situation that voters that aren't necessarily pro Mamdani, they're kind of in this weird space of like who to support. So I think it's kind of a interesting example of that in a way, push and pull. But I don't know that that's necessarily super compelling for a lot of voters, especially since, it's one thing when it's your first endorsement. Second and third, I think it kind of loses its impact a little bit.
Yeah, and I don't know how much endorsements at all impact elections anymore, but I'm wondering what you think of this. Is it not a great look for Mamdani that some of the big New York politicos have not backed him? Or maybe it's not a great look for them. You tell me. But Governor Kathy Hochul, Senator Chuck Schumer, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Congressman Tom Suozzi, none of them have endorsed Mamdani yet. Does he need a united front to win, or can he do this without them?
I think his, let's say a very sizable showing in the primary has shown that he can do this without necessarily, lining up everybody behind him. I mean, when you have a strong enough, citywide coalition bringing together all these different groups in a way that people haven't seen before in the city, I think in a lot of ways that's kind of, if you have that, maybe the endorsements don't necessarily matter as much. Now, I mean, Mamdani's campaign was boosted by a few key endorsements during the primary. I mean, his co-endorsement with Brad Lander, the comptroller who was also running in the primary. I mean,
Right.
the data has shown that his votes, like the number 1 and 2 votes, are part of the reason why Mamdani won. Also, he got the backing of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I mean, who is a leading figure in the progressive movement in the city and nationwide. And I mean, that just those two, it was kind of like this 2-week period prior to the primary. And that wave of momentum, I mean, really carried him through election day. So I think it's kind of about, it might not necessarily be the quantity that's the most important thing. It's more the quality, or like how important those individual, very specific endorsements are at that given moment.
Yeah, good point. Let's talk Trump for a minute. Cuomo is using Trump's DC takeover as a new talking point, pointing out that he stood up to Trump back in 2020 when Trump was sending the National Guard into certain states and cities. And he says that if Mamdani is elected, Trump will flatten him like a pancake. Is this issue, what's happening in DC, is this issue good for Andrew Cuomo?
I think it depends on which group he's talking to, right? I mean, I think a lot of what's compelling to Cuomo for certain voters is this idea that he's this sort of strong, brash figure that could go up against someone like Trump. That's, sort of a similar kind of vibe, let's say. But I think, people or candidates like Mamdani would honestly welcome the possibility, or welcome the chance to bring that comparison between Trump and Cuomo. I mean, they both come from Queens. They have a years-long relationship. Their fathers knew each other. I mean, they've spoken for decades. I think Cuomo recently said that, he's spoken to Trump hundreds of times over the years. I mean, I think, you also risk, people questioning that dynamic. I think Mamdani could say, oh, yeah, they might not send in the National Guard, but why is that?
Flip side of that, Mamdani's also trying out an anti-Trump message. He found a pocket of the city where Trump is still popular, though, yesterday. Last night, he went to an anti-Trump rally in Staten Island where Trump won by 30 points in 24. But there were pro-Trump protesters there, and they were yelling at him, and they were telling him to go home, and they were also saying, this is Trump country. Mamdani's obviously not going to get Trump voters, but are there enough of them in New York City to matter in this election?
Well, obviously, I think, numbers wise, I mean, Democrats outnumber registered Democrats outnumber Republicans by a substantial margin.
Yes.
But this is also a uniquely competitive general election for the city. I mean, there's not usually this much going on this time of year. So I think if it becomes sort of like a numbers game, I think, running up the numbers in even the littlest areas can matter. I think it's probably politically wise of Mamdani to do as much outreach as possible, even in areas that might not necessarily be, explicitly pro Mamdani, because you never know who you could, potentially peel off just because he's a new face offering something that, people
different.
Something different, especially when we have all these different candidates who have been around for quite a while.
Nia, thanks so much for being here.
No, thank you.
Up next, a different president is paying attention to this race We told you it's what everyone is talking about. More on that in a minute. But first, we went out on the streets of New York City to get your take on the race for mayor. Battleground, New York City. Fight for your vote. We'll be right back.
I'm probably voting for Cuomo. Well, I think he did a good job as governor. And I heard stories that he wasn't a nice guy and all of that. But as long as he does his job as governor or mayor, and I think he's experienced and, liked his dad also.
We're back with Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote, where we're following the New York City mayoral election with a laser focus. While Zohran Mamdani hasn't gotten all the support from Democrats he may want, one person is apparently a fan, former President Barack Obama. A new piece in the New York Times examines Obama world's interest in this race. Let's discuss. Joining me now is Christina Greer, an associate professor at Fordham University and author of How to Build a Democracy. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Sure. So there's a lot I want to talk to you about. This New York Times piece about Obama was so interesting. Apparently, Obama called Mamdani in June. They had a lengthy conversation. He congratulated him on his primary win. He gave him advice on governing and how to give people hope. I can't imagine. I'm an empath, so I'm like immediately putting myself in Zohran Mamdani's shoes. I cannot imagine how surreal that must have been for him. What did you think?
Absolutely. I mean, don't forget, way back in 2008, Barack Obama was a 44-year-old upstart with very little record running for the
junior
presidency.
senator, right?
Exactly. And he'd been a senator for about 20 minutes before he decided to run for the presidency. So here we have Zohran Mamdani, who, has been a state legislator for not very long. And he's 33 years old, and he's running for what some people argue is the second hardest job in America, the first being the presidency, the second being mayor of New York City. According to LBJ, actually, it's the hardest job in America. And so having someone who has a very similar background in some ways, the difference, there's some real differences, though. For Barack Obama, many people said that he was radical. They said that he was, a socialist from, born in Africa. He actually was not a socialist born in Africa. Zohran Mamdani actually is a socialist, who is identified democratic socialist, who actually was born in Uganda. And the difference, though, is Obama's skin color may have been radical for a lot of people, but his policies absolutely weren't. If we think about the presidency in a distribution curve, he looks a lot like, our modern day presidencies, the Clintons, the Bushes, sort of roughly in the center of things, not Donald Trump, obviously. With Zohran Mamdani, that's different. He is actually a progressive in the Democratic Party, which I think taps into why we haven't seen the Kathy Hochul's, the Hakeem Jeffries, the Kirsten Gillibrands and Chuck Schumers of the world actually endorsing him, because he actually is presenting a vision that's slightly different from the moderate Democrats that we've seen come through New York City, but also our national Democratic Party more writ large.
That's an interesting point, because I was wondering what you thought of the fact that Obama made the phone call, but he hasn't come out publicly. Is that for Mamdani's benefit, or, what do you think is behind that decision?
Yeah, if we think about post-presidency Obama, he hasn't really weighed in quite a bit of things, and I think he really does respect the notion of, there's only one president at a time, as frustrating as it may be to watch where our country is going for so many Americans. I think, giving Mamdani a phone call is just to say, it's a very unique position to be a public servant, especially a young public servant. He's a once in a generation campaigner, just like Obama. But we know that campaigning is not governance. And so there will be some growing pains. It's looking more and more likely that Mamdani will cross the finish line and become the 111th mayor of New York City. And so I think, Obama not publicly endorsing him, I don't think is a slight to Mamdani. I think if he starts doing that, then that essentially opens up the floodgate. Why didn't he endorse Karen Bass? Why didn't he endorse Brandon Johnson in Chicago? Why didn't he endorse Brandon Scott in Baltimore? The list can go on. And then we sort of pull Obama back into a public space that I think he's been actively trying to distance himself from in a lot of ways post-presidency. He's got a lot of other interests. He's quite young still. And so I think this was just an encouragement phone call, and recognizing, though, that there are a significant number of Democrats in the United States who do lean a little bit more to the left, and they want to see a type of big D Democratic politics that they haven't seen in quite some time and didn't actually see during Obama's presidency either.
Yeah, and I hear you about Obama's sort of reticence to get back into it all, but while the Democratic brand is not great, he's still very popular. And I know there are a lot of liberal voters who have been critical of him for not being more participatory in the current era of politics. Should he play a bigger role in this race, the midterms, 2028?
Yeah, so there are a few races, right? So there's the New York City race, which is November 4th, 2025. And then there's the midterms, November of 2026. I think, him staying out of the New York City race, he hasn't been in the New York City race in the past. He didn't really weigh in with Eric Adams in 2021. He didn't really weigh in with de Blasio in 2013 or his reelection.
Right.
So, I don't think it's out of the ordinary that he's essentially on the sidelines. Now, moving to the midterms, that's a different conversation. We're looking at a potential of Democrats trying to take back the House. We're looking at egregious gerrymandering tactics from the Republican Party to try and make sure that Democrats don't even have a winning chance, because they recognize that many of their policies are not popular with their own base. So they need to redraw the lines to sort of decrease big D Democratic power. So in November of 2026, I think we might see a different Obama in that lead up for the midterm elections, because that's more of a national conversation with Congress working in conjunction with the presidency, and this particular Congress abdicating so much of their power to the current president.
And other Obama world people have been interested in Mamdani as well. My friend David Axelrod just went to visit his New York City office. John Favreau and Dan Pfeiffer have been in touch with the campaign. Do you think that they see Mamdani as the next Obama?
I think that would be a fair assessment. I do think, though, that, Mamdani's campaign, as much as I'm sure they respect the interest and the institutional knowledge of folks from the Obama campaign, what has troubled Democrats in the past and sort of boxed them into a corner is that 2025 is not 2008. And so the conversations and the strategies that were employed during the Obama era, where he comes essentially out of nowhere and takes out the most powerful 21st century Democratic family, that we've seen since the Kennedys in the Clinton family, that was something that worked in 2008. Those strategies and those conversations and the technology in and of itself are very different. And so I think the Mamdani campaign would be wise to welcome the conversation, but let's not try and use old strategies for new conversations.
Yeah, it's a very interesting push and pull, because from the left, I hear a lot of Democrats say we want more Obama in the race. Rahm Emanuel, you got to run. And then from other folks on the left saying, you guys got to go away. We need new folks in this conversation. Christina, stay with me. I've got a lot more questions for you. Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. We'll be right back. We're back with Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote, one more time with Christina Greer. She's co-host of the FAQ NYC podcast. A slew of young Democrats around the country are running now to unseat older establishment Democrats. We've had some of them on the show. Is the Democratic Party getting this desire for younger blood, fresher faces, and change? Is the party itself understanding that that's a big desire among Democratic voters to see that change?
Yeah, that's a real important question that I think the Democratic leadership is reticent to have. If we think about the Democratic leaders that inspire a lot of folks that are sort of in our conversation by and large, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer is the leader, Maxine Waters. We're looking at septuagenarians and octogenarians. Nancy Pelosi just stepped aside. We have a baton passing problem. When you think about someone, the late, great Charlie Rangel, I will never talk badly about Charlie Rangel, but, he was in office for 46 years. And so as someone who teaches young people and tries to inspire young people to run for office, it's very difficult when they're looking at certain offices and someone has been there for 20, 30, 40 years. How are they going to actually be able to make inroads? And so the baton passing is really problematic. And I think a lot of young people post, Mamdani June 24th win are recognizing you can't wait on the sidelines for people to leave their seat. Now you just have to go ahead and take it.
Right.
And I think that's the
Right.
same way that young Charlie Rangel took the seat from Adam Clayton Powell, who had held it for over 20 years, and then he held on to it for 46. But I think we're going to see a wave of young people recognizing that they're tired of waiting for a generation to pass it on to them. Now, the other footnote to that, though, is we can't have young people who think like old people, right? In the sense that we can't have sort of new blood coming into the political process that still has an old way of thinking. And so luckily, it looks like the people who are interested in taking some of these seats actually want to push forward new ideas, and they're not just replicating kind of, a passe Democratic politic that sort of needs to move on.
Let's talk about Andrew Cuomo. For voters who don't maybe respond to Mamdani's socialism or maybe his age, his inexperience, they might look to Andrew Cuomo. He's a flawed candidate for sure, but does he still have the name ID among older voters, older African-American voters, working class voters, to be a convincing alternative?
Right. And I think he does still have a base somewhere in New York City, right? We have to remember that a primary voter is not necessarily a general election voter. And so even though Andrew Cuomo got trounced in the June 24th primary, as we move toward the November 4th general, there are a few moving factors. So we're going to have, we're a very highly big D Democratic registered city in New York, but we are not this hardcore blue city. It's a lot of purple in New York City. So people are fine with a moderate to conservative leadership. Don't forget, we had 20 years of Republican mayors, 3 terms of Bloomberg, preceded by 2 terms of Giuliani. So it's not that New York City Democratic voters are allergic to voting for a conservative or a moderate, whether they're a Democrat or a Republican. So let's leave Curtis Sliwa out. He'll get a small percentage of people who will just have to vote for the Republican. Let's leave Jim Walden out, who's essentially a respected lawyer, but doesn't have a lot of name recognition, is very new to the scene. We have Eric Adams as the sitting mayor, and Andrew Cuomo is roughly a 3-term, disgraced governor. Both of them have very high name recognition and identification, and the Venn diagram of the two of them overlaps pretty well. So Andrew Cuomo and Eric Adams are essentially going after very similar bases. The difference, though, is, and this is why I think so many people are confident that Zohran Mamdani will cross the finish line on November 4th, is that even though he didn't really talk to a lot of the communities that are the base of Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo in the primary, because those voters were solidly with Andrew Cuomo in the primary, he's able to still make inroads with those communities by talking to them about their needs. Listen, Black voters aren't that complicated. They want everything else that everyone else wants. It's safe streets and, economic prosperity. It's not that, there are these unicorns in the political process. So the conversation that Zohran Mamdani is having with voters to help demystify what democratic socialism is, to help demystify sort of some of the past practices of Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo has been very effective and very quickly. And he's also got several surrogates, and getting more and more by the day, who are respected people in the communities that Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo are trying to court. And I think that is going to be a key piece in introducing this 33-year-old from Queens that most, solid Democratic voters have never heard of. But he's not actually just talking about the problems of Andrew Cuomo, the problems of Eric Adams, the problems of Donald Trump. He's actually putting forth some ideas, as progressive as they may be. But what I've heard from talking to various voters is that he's given them a glimmer of hope, something that we heard about in 2008, where they thought that they actually didn't have that anymore in any part of their political process. And he's awakened something in them that makes them eager to go out and vote and tell other people to do the same. So we are feeling the echoes of 2008 in a very different type of candidacy. And I think that is what spells trouble for Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see if, I'm assuming there's going to be a general election debate. I've not seen dates yet, and I don't know when or if that's happening, but it'll be really interesting to see these people together and talking to each other, about each other, to voters on these issues, because we do know we feel like we know Andrew Cuomo pretty well. New Yorkers feel like they know Eric Adams kind of well. They feel like they don't know Zohran Mamdani at all unless they're just getting to know him and they really like him. It's all going to be very interesting, which is a long way of saying, Christina, you have to come back. You'll have to just come back and talk more to us over the course of this election. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll see you back here tomorrow and every day, Monday through Friday, for more in-depth conversation and context on Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote.